They talk about the Tuareg, the jihadist. They fund the jihadist. They told them to move toward the capital Bamako, and then they intervened. They gave them plane to fly them away so that France can build a military base in Bamako because it has a lot of hydrocarbon resources.
How much is that a realistic proposition?
I wouldn't say that France-Afrique is very alive now. I would say it's dying, in fact. 20 years ago, Africa was tied to France heavily with economics, politics, military things, much more than now. Now, economics are difficult for the French in Africa. You know the role of the Chinese now, but even Indians, even people from Brazil, even other Europeans like Germany, they have succeeded in getting markets in Africa much more than the French. The French are now on the
descent.
On the descent, yeah, that's right.
But militarily, they remain engaged.
Yeah, but let's say, politically speaking, they are not in a good situation now, too. The regimes were granted by the French presence. This is not true now.
France can no longer guarantee the stability of regimes.
No, not guarantee, and there are no treaty about that.
But so how come they're fighting wars? So many wars in Africa.
Since 4 or 5 years, there is quite one war for 1 year.
Every year is a war. So the Ivory Coast in 2010.
Yeah, they had to expel Mr. Gbagbo, who didn't want to respect the votes. And then 2011, Libya.
Libya, of course.
They expelled Muammar Gaddafi.
2012.
2012, Mali. They expelled the jihadists.
And they're still there.
And they are still there. And then this year,
the Central African Republic, the CAR.
That's right. That's right.
So that's one war every year.
Yeah.
That's a lot of wars.
A lot of wars, but small wars.
Small wars.
No.
So how many soldiers are there in Africa?
10,000 altogether.
What's the central command for the French forces?
There is a it is in Paris.
It's in Paris.
But there is a
reorganization?
There is a reorganization. They concentrate now 3,000 people, soldiers, in the different countries of Sahel.
And the mission is what?
The mission is to try to not to let the jihadist groups, Al-Qaeda and others, to develop their presence.
And you think they're succeeding?
If they were not there, it would be worse than now.
But, are we sure of that?
Yeah, I believe it.
Do you think there is a military solution to the jihadists?
It's never the only solution. There must be political side of the treatment of the crisis, of course.
And is there such a volunté? Is there such a will?
Yeah.
There is.
There is the volunté, but there are no means.
Is that what explains why France's influence is decreasing?
Bien sûr.
In Africa?
Bien sûr.
That Africans are taking things into their hands?
Bien sûr.
And you think we will escape the post-coloniality in Africa? We will now go into a new phase, now that they can bargain with the Chinese and the Brazilians and the Indians?
Bien sûr, et c'est ce que je dis aussi quand je dis qu'il n'y a plus de ce qu'on appelait la France-Afrique un petit peu, c'est-à-dire cette manière néocoloniale de continuer à avoir des relations spéciales avec le continent africain. Cette chose-là n'existe plus, effectivement, excusez-moi, cette chose-là n'existe plus ou de moins en moins actuellement, disons, ça n'est pas l'évolution actuelle.
On this sobering note, thank you.
Il veut me faire dire des trucs, hein.
Je pose des questions.
It makes no sense to invite a snake in your house and ask that snake to be a friend. And when it bites you, you start complaining. But the snake will tell you, I'm a snake. What did you think I am? I have fangs. I can't help it. This is how I was created. The world way it is moving is a control of resources. And the first thing that our nation needs to do is learn to control their own systems, to build up their own first monetary system, meaning that the government should have sovereign money. Uganda should have sovereign money. It should not allow commercial banks to create money or telecom companies to create money. Uganda should have its own card payment system. We should not rely on credit cards, so Visa, and MasterCard, because that's another form of money creation. As long as money is electronic, the country is losing money. Uganda should have its own gold, reserve its currency with gold reserve. And Uganda should start setting up its own companies to make roads. If we can't make our own roads, instead of giving our money to somebody else and putting us in debt, we better have no roads. Why don't we build the railways? The railway is cheap. But I will tell you why the government doesn't want to build the railways. The government doesn't want to build the railways because there is very little commission on a railway. The people whom you'll be negotiating to give you right of way on their land, they will give you a few meters. That's enough for a train to pass. The road that you'll be building, the rail that you'll be building per square kilometer is cheaper than building a road. So the road will take 100 million, the railway will take 10 million. So in that way, where is the commission? That is the reason. Why would we have an express highway to Entebbe costing $500 million? And it is going to be, it's already full now. Even before they open it, it's already full. And anybody who brought that would have known that if you had an express train to Entebbe, it would carry more people, you could put more carriages, you'd travel in comfort, you would arrive in time. But there'd be no money. Now, what you need to be aware is that the age of final recolonization and final destruction is the age that we are in now. The age of final recolonization and final destruction.
When the global business media is suddenly interested, when even The Economist, the neoliberal Bible of free trade and free markets, changes their forecast from hopeless to hopeful, somebody should ask the question, hopeful for whom?
So people died for the cause of Africa, of course, of its independence. Yeah. There have been attempts at establishing democracies. But in the end of the day, what we see is the French are there and expanding. The Americans are there and expanding. The Chinese are there expanding like hell. But where are Africans from those challenges that we're talking about? Are we going back to the same old historical events?
Most of our growth, we see we are talking about 6% GDP per annum and those kind of stuff, but they are coming from mining. They are not really trickling down to the ordinary person.
Yeah. They're coming from where?
From mining sectors, basically. We are
natural resources.
I go to my home village, and it's the same as it was 10 years ago.
Your home village where?
In Botswana. It's about state priorities. They don't even care about the masses. When you are talking about these deals, you come to certain countries, all state enterprises now have been privatized, because it gets the state or the bureaucrats something in their pockets. Do you get what I'm trying to say? And in the end, they're not providing any opportunity for the youth. So there are lots of unemployment in Africa now. And people might want to travel out of Africa because things are just not working.
For centuries, Africa was treated like a chessboard by competing global powers. But for a moment, about half a century ago, it seemed that there was a sliver of hope. That somewhere between the darkness of colonialism and the horrors of an emerging Cold War, that popular movements were winning independence, taking matters into their hands. Africa was rising. But then the Cold War killed the dream. Moscow and Washington divided the continent into new spheres of influence. Proxy wars plunged the continents into civil war. But 2 decades after the Cold War, it seemed that Africa is rising again, that investments are flowing in. We need to ask the big question, and we need to ask it in Africa. Are Africans at last taking matters into their own hands, or is this just another scramble for Africa?
On our own, as Uganda, frankly, we might not be able to resist the empire. So we need alliances. And amongst our enemies, or amongst nations that have not fought us or sought to enslave us, is Russia, is China. China has got colonial tendencies. China is not an interested and a benevolent bystander or arbiter. No. He's not just interested in trade. China is interested in creating space for its population. China is interested in creating markets. And China wants resources for its population. It doesn't want resources for your population. China is not looking at reciprocity. No. China is not looking at transferring technology. No. China is looking at replacing America as a colonizer. That is China. Chinese people might be interested in getting on, but surely once they start coming in numbers and numbers and numbers and numbers, are we going to fight 1.5 billion people of China? Nuclear armed China? Technologically advanced China? No, we are not. India, we are not. We are so asleep. We are not going to fight. Now, you know, I am not afraid of a battle. But I am also thinking of posterity. To behave like a Christian. When you are weak, you teach the gospel of meekness. When you are strong and you have banks and you have territory and you have armies and you have whatever, to talk about, I have come with the sword. I didn't come to bring peace, but to bring a sword to set brother against brother. The war that you have seen in Libya, the war that you see in Nigeria, the war that you have partly seen in Uganda, and you see in Congo, that you are experiencing in Somalia, those seeds of chaos and disaster are being sown by an empire that is crumbling. And this empire is not going to leave us alone.
Kenya and Africa is a hopeful land and is in the early stage of taking off. So we believe there are a lot of opportunities.
When Gawai moved to Kenya 10 years ago, he says there were only a handful of Chinese living here. Now there are tens of thousands.
The competition between China and the US about this land of Africa, I have my own opinion. They decide to look east. Now Kenya or Africa country will make a decision which one is better and which one I will take.
And Kenya, like most of the continent, is choosing China for its big infrastructure projects.
Your Excellency the President will now proceed to view the port layout display.
Last August, 3 African heads of state celebrated the Chinese-built expansion to the port of Mombasa. It will soon be linked to a Chinese-built railway connecting 5 East African countries.
Your Excellencies, that is what our region needs.
A railway for $3.5 billion connects into the port, builds ports. It's quite the achievement for Africa and for China.
There's ports already in every African country that has an ocean front. And those ports were built by another imperial power, one or another, in the last century. This is what imperial powers do. They build ports so that they can send their goods to that country, and so that they can export from that country to their markets the things they need from that country.
You don't think Africa needs this kind of infrastructure anyway, at any rate?
Africa desperately needs infrastructure. Whether it needs infrastructure on these terms is the question. They are negotiating many of these deals on the basis of a kind of barter. Secure supply of resources for a piece of infrastructure. That's a type of modern barter. Most people elsewhere are not doing that kind of trade or investment with Africa. The second thing that they are doing, which makes this arguably very far from a win-win situation, is China is creating these very powerful feedback loops for its own victory, its own win, that really cut Africa or African countries out of the equation in terms of the benefits. So the blueprints and engineering, no turnover, no handover.
It's all Chinese.
All Chinese. The workers, they send over 500 or 1,000 workers. They do this for 2 years. I've been on projects where even the people pushing wheelbarrows are Chinese.
So what you're saying is that the loan is Chinese, the investment is Chinese, the plans are Chinese, the designs are Chinese, and the implementations and the workers are Chinese?
Many times even the materials are Chinese.
Oh, you're actually importing the materials?
The salaries of the workers are typically, or at least very often, banked in China. So win-win is a propaganda slogan. It's not an accurate description of this sort of arrangement. Imperialism evolves. It's different from age to age. The circumstances change. What doesn't change is the balance of power between the two parties that are engaged in imperialism.
The weaker and the stronger.
The weaker and the stronger. And the weaker has an inability to resist or a lack of alternatives.
Or to bargain.
And that's exactly what we're talking about.
I am holding in my hands 50,000 Uganda shillings. This is called, and what I'm going to explain today is something so important, so crucial for the existence of an economy. What I'm going to explain here, holding this 50,000, is not taught in economics textbook. Don't say, my teacher didn't teach me that. He didn't know. Don't say, my professor didn't teach me this. He didn't know, or if he knew, he didn't want to give you power. The concept I'm going to explain to you is an economics book called seigniorage. We are going to show you how this word is spelled. S-E-I-G-N-O-R-A-G-E. S-E-I-G-N-O-R-A-G-E. Seigniorage. It's written like seigniorage, but it is seigniorage. Now, seigniorage is defined as the difference between the cost of printing is the profit that is made by a sovereign or a government by issuing money less the cost of printing and distribution. It is the profit made by a sovereign or a government by issuing money less the cost of printing and distribution. So here we have 50,000. If I got this 50,000 and I gave it to you to say, TV Africa has given you this piece of paper, forget that it's 50,000, but go and print for me a piece of paper that has the word Bank of Uganda, 50,000 shillings, that has some graphics, and bring it. I want 10,000 of these. I am going to give it to school children to know how money looks like. And you went to print them. Probably the printer will ask you 500 Uganda shillings or 1 cent to print each one of them. And that is what a government does. When it wants to print money, it looks around for who can print it. It goes to, our money is printed in England, which is the serious thing any economy can do. Why get another country to print your money? Because that country can, anytime they want to invade you or to do something, they can tell their own citizens to print your money and come and use it to deflate your money, to destroy your money. Like Zimbabwe's economy was destroyed by Zimbabwean dollars being printed elsewhere and then flooded into Zimbabwe to reduce the value. So anyway, if I gave it to you to go and print, you will find that you use about 500 Uganda shillings to print. But when the government, it costs the government, say, 500 shillings to print. But when it issues it to pay for salaries, to pay for goods, to pay for services, it issues it as 50,000. Which means the government, the cost to government of printing and issuing this is 500. But the government, when it issues it, it settles a payment of 50,000. Government has made a profit of how much? The government has made a profit of 49,500. 49,500. Remember the definition. The profit a government makes by issuing money less the cost of printing and distribution. So, in this case, the government makes 49,000. If it had 2 of these, it would make 90,000. If it had 1 million of these, if the government of Uganda, for example, from 1986, to 2016, had printed 5 trillion, if you remove the cost of printing and distribution, which could be, let's say, it's 500 billion, it means 4.5 trillion profit the government has made. Complete profit. Which also means if any other person issues a currency or any form of payment, cryptocurrency, digital currency, credit card, payment voucher, the government loses money. Commercial banks, every time you go in a bank to borrow money, and the manager says the money is in your account, he sits on a computer and magics that money and creates it and makes what we call a phantom deposit. But that act of credit creation is called credit creation. It makes money out of nothing, out of thin air, and just puts it in a computer. Ugandan commercial banks by 2016 had made 12.5 trillion. 12.5. Which means the government of Uganda had lost revenue of about 12 trillion. 12 trillion. Now you understand this even if you never understand anything that Kihura Nkuba teaches. The telecom companies, right now there is a case of MTN in 2000 and 2011. Revenue Authority wants them to pay 362 billion over the money that they created. The telecom companies alone have created in electronic payment money out of nothing, about 45 trillion. It could, some people even say 60 trillion, because if one telecom company alone, MTN, this case is in court, it was proven in court that they make money out of nothing. It was proven in court that they made about 2 trillion, which was not issued by the central bank. And the Revenue Authority wants them to pay revenue, although they took the case to a wrong court. They took it to a commercial court. And when there is a high court judgment that says all tax payment system should go through the tribunal. Listen to me now. The telecom companies have made about 45 trillion. Government has lost 45 trillion. It has lost 12 trillion in commercial banks. And if we aggregate all forms of electronic payment, you will find government has lost about 100 trillion. Which means if government had created that 100 trillion, my God. Now let me tell you this. Seigniorage, I have discussed it with the president. He has understood it. Credit creation, I don't think he understands. I met recently one of the leading businessmen in Uganda, George Bitature. And I gave him a document from Bank of England. And I'm going to show you that document on television. The Bank of England in 2014 issues a document called Modern Money Mechanics. Followed it with interviews. Sir George King, Marvin King, who was a governor of Bank of England, also in an interview in his voice, Bank of England in its voice stood up and said, banks create money out of nothing, the opposite of what is described in major economics textbook. Rather than banks lending deposits, the act of lending creates deposits. They call it broad money. Narrow money is what I'm holding, notes and coins. That is called narrow money. Broad money is what the bank creates out of nothing. And I'm going to play a clip from the Bank of England. You can see it yourself.
The Bank of England is undergoing a criminal investigation by the UK's Serious Fraud Office over the possible rigging of its money market auctions during the financial crisis. With me to explain the story is Caroline Binham, our financial regulation correspondent. So Caroline, we learnt now that the Serious Fraud Office is involved in this investigation into the money market. Can you tell us what they're looking at?
It's still very much shrouded in secrecy what exactly the SFO is looking at. We do know, and it's been confirmed now by the SFO as well as the Bank of England in response to our story, that it is investigating a file that was passed to it by the bank itself following an internal investigation by Lord Grabiner QC, who is a very eminent barrister in the city. Grabiner was brought in by the bank last summer, as we initially reported in November, to investigate whether any bank official knew of, condoned, or even perhaps participated in potential rigging of money market auctions, which were what the bank used at the onset of the financial crisis when liquidity was just beginning to dry up.
Do we know in this latest investigation whether there was any wrongdoing on the part of bank employees?
The bank has never said. In November, when we wrote our original story, they came back with a statement that said no action has been taken or is contemplated against any bank employee. Now, clearly that leaves room for action being taken against past employees, and it also means that things could have changed in the interim.
So does this raise questions about transparency at the bank?
I think absolutely it does, and this is one of the great ironies. The bank only last week said it was officially saying goodbye to its era of constructive ambiguity when a raise of the governor's eyebrows would be enough to influence bank behaviour. And that is part of a wider effort by the bank over certainly the last 2 years under Governor Mark Carney to become a more accountable, transparent institution.
Do you think we're going to see reaction to this from the Treasury Select Committee, from the politicians? How do you think they're going to respond to this news?
I think we will see comment. We have already had a response from the chairman of the Select Committee, Andrew Tyree, last night, just saying that it was the right thing for the bank to do to refer the matter to the SFO. I think other members of the Select Committee who questioned Mark Carney himself on Tuesday about this second investigation, at the time we just thought it was an internal one, they will have questions for him because they questioned him on Tuesday and he said he had nothing to add. They referred to our FT article in November, questioned whether there'd been unofficial leaks to the FT, and Mr. Carney said he didn't know how to answer that particular question.
And how bad, Caroline, do you think this is for London's reputation as a financial centre? We've had scandal after scandal after scandal, and now another one. What does this mean for London?
I think, no doubt, both the city and the bank itself will take a dent in its reputation. It's yet more alleged rigging. It's yet more allegations of improper information flows. It's historic. It does go back to before the financial crisis. Both financial firms and probably the Bank of England itself would say everything has been reformed since those times. But
well, how confident do you think we can be about that it has all been reformed, that we're now living in a different era?
I think one has to have a healthy dose of cynicism and scepticism about it.
Caroline, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The British Parliament discussed this again in 2014. British Parliament One of the conservative from High Wycombe, Dave something, Cabell, whatever his name was. British Parliament discussed credit creation, and the man presents and says most of the money in our economy is made by commercial banks out of nothing every time somebody goes there to get a loan. Forget about a developed economy. Forget about stabilizing an economy. Forget about making people rich. Forget about wealth creation. Forget about Bonaba Gigaware. If you don't know credit creation, your economy will go to hell in a basket and your government will never survive. Never. So all these cryptocurrencies, all this electronic payment, all this mobile banking, it is just a swindle, an economic swindle by a government that is completely asleep, like Rip Van Winkle. Asleep. When I started engaging Bank of Uganda in 2016, Bank of Uganda first denied that there was even such a thing as seigniorage. They denied. Until we got a letter that showed us that they were discussing seigniorage, a conference on seigniorage in Arusha. Because I wanted to know how much money, where have they put that money that they have made from seigniorage? That 5 trillion. Why have they allowed commercial banks create trillions? And they said, you see, we can't show you, because eventually they agreed, yes, there is seigniorage, but we get the profit from treasury bills, profit from bonds, profit from the printing of money. We add it together, but we can't tell you how much we have made from printing of money, how much we have made from printing of bonds, how much of money we made from treasury bills. How on earth? And don't be scared by these things, treasury bills. What is a treasury bill? It's a piece of paper with the signature of a governor promising to pay you after a few months or 1 year. And how does he pay? He pays by issuing another piece of paper with his signature. One buys this, gives him a paper, and another one brings money, gives him a paper which he produced in the first place. When you hear that commercial banks have reserves in central bank, don't think that you can go and they open a big warehouse and you see money and they say this belongs to Barclays, this belongs to Stanbic, this belongs to Baroda. Nothing. It is figures. Complete figures. It is the house of cards. It is the house of fiction. Bank reserves don't exist. They exist in words and numbers. There is no reserve at all. And the bank doesn't have the money. If we all went to the bank to get our money, the bank will close. That's what happened to Greenland. That's what happened to Gold Trust Bank. That's what happened to all these banks. That's what happened to Sudhir. Sudhir was lending money that he didn't have when people... However, the act of creating money by bank depends in part to how many customers you have, because you have to work out how much they need every day, which is like 10%. As long as you can keep that 10%, this one comes, this one deposits, this one does this, it is a fraud. It is a scam. Banking is a scam. Banks are thieves. That's why you see this tallest building that they have. Thieves. Now, if you are a lawyer, you go and look for a case of Jerome Daly. Daly is D-A-L-E-Y, Jerome, versus the First Bank of Montgomery. 1969, Jerome Daly versus the First Bank of Montgomery. 1969. You will see Jerome Daly, the bank came to repossess his house. They went to court. When they went to court, Jerome Daly argued that while he had given the bank a house, the bank didn't have any money to give him. The bank manager was brought and he was asked, where did you get the money from? And he says, I created it on a computer from nothing. That is the banking practice that we all do. Nobody has any money, we just get it from nowhere. Get me, Jerome Daly kept his house Because the judge ruled that only God can create something out of nothing. Don't tell me you are an economist unless you know credit creation. Don't tell me that you are an economist unless you know seigniorage. And if you really want to get to understand this, go and read from chapter 1 to chapter 49 of the book Tragedy and Hope. When Bill Clinton became president of America, he credited his knowledge to the book by this professor. The book is called Tragedy and Hope. The professor's name, Carol Quigley. Carol, C-A-L-L-R-R-O-L-L. Quigley, Q-U-I-G-L-E-Y. Carol Quigley. It's called Tragedy and Hope. And in Tragedy and Hope, it will show you how these nations became major powers. How Holland, which was a tiny country, coming out of the water, how Britain became a colonial major power when it was so small, British Island, and how America did what it did. You know why? Because they knew credit creation. So, in my next lecture, I will explain how banks make money. So don't go away.